The Prime Minister apologises to a Libyan dissident for Britain's part in his kidnap and subsequent torture by Colonel Gaddafi's regime. Abdul Hakim Belhaj says a tip-off from MI6 led to him and his pregnant wife being captured in Thailand and then jailed and tortured in Libya.
It's been 6 years of prison and 6 years of waiting, which was a continuation of the suffering for me and my family, and hopefully today represents the end of all that.
Today, he and his wife accepted the unprecedented apology and £500,000 in compensation.
On behalf of Her Majesty's Government, I apologise unreservedly. We are profoundly sorry for the ordeal that you both suffered and our role in it.
Also on the programme tonight, no interest rate rise this month after all, as the Bank of England says the UK economy has hit a temporary soft patch. Freed by North Korea, President Trump welcomes 3 American prisoners home as he reveals he's meeting Kim Jong-un in Singapore next month. BT announces plans to cut 13,000 jobs, most of them in the UK, as part of a £1 billion cost-cutting drive. And 4 years after she was first diagnosed, Dame Barbara Windsor's husband reveals his 80-year-old wife has Alzheimer's.
And coming up on BBC News, manager Carlos Carvalhal will leave Swansea at the end of the season. The club are all but relegated from the Premier League after 8 matches without a win.
Good evening and welcome to the BBC News at 6. The Prime Minister has apologised to a Libyan dissident after the UK played a part in his detention and torture by Colonel Gaddafi's forces 14 years ago. Theresa May said Abdul Hakim Belhaj and his wife Fatima Bouchar, who was pregnant at the time, had suffered appalling treatment. The couple say an MI6 tip-off helped the US kidnap them in Thailand. They were then taken to Libya, where Mr Belhaj was tortured. Our security correspondent Gordon Carrera has been to meet him in Istanbul. There's flash photography at the start of his report.
In Istanbul, a meeting between Britain's ambassador and Abdul Hakim Belhaj, a man who says Britain colluded in his torture. A letter from the Prime Minister and a handshake signals the closing of a dark chapter for the UK government. Just moments before, Mr Belhaj had watched this unprecedented apology in Parliament to him and his wife.
On behalf of Her Majesty's Government, I apologise unreservedly. We are profoundly sorry for the ordeal that you both suffered and our role in it. The UK Government has learned many lessons from this period.
In an exclusive TV interview, Mr Belhaj told me he was grateful, even though it had taken so long.
It's been 6 years of prison and 6 years of waiting, which was a continuation of the suffering for me and my family, and hopefully today represents the end of all that.
The story begins with another handshake between Tony Blair and Colonel Gaddafi in 2004. The Libyan leader gave up his nuclear weapons programme. Britain promised to help him against his opponents. He was flown to Libya. With him was his pregnant wife. He says he was then tortured by Colonel Gaddafi's regime and also interrogated by British officials. After Gaddafi's fall in 2011, letters from MI6 to Libyan officials were discovered, detailing Britain's involvement. Belhaj launched a legal action against the British government, Sir Mark Allen, an MI6 officer named in the files, and Jack Straw, who was Foreign Secretary. Today, Jack Straw acknowledged he had given verbal approval for some intelligence to be shared, but says he'd always sought to act lawfully. After years of damaging revelations, the British government has finally decided to apologise in return for the legal case being dropped. Their hope is that this will draw a line under the past, a past in which deals with dubious regimes took Britain and its spies into difficult places. In London, Mr Belhaj's wife and son went to Parliament to hear the Attorney General's apology in person. She received compensation of £500,000. But her husband had not asked for money. All he said he wanted was an apology. And today he got it. Gordon Carrera, BBC News, Istanbul.
The Bank of England says the UK economy has hit a temporary soft patch, which means interest rates will remain unchanged at 0.5%. Economists had been widely expecting rates to rise this month. An increase is still expected later this year. The bank blamed the bad weather, the beast from the east, for the slowdown which disrupted construction and kept shoppers at home. Our economics editor Kamal Ahmed has this report.
Money don't get everything, it's true.
Time for a different tune from the bank. 3 months ago, all the noise was about an interest rate rise. Not anymore. 3 months of weak growth, dragged down by the beast from the east, has left people cautious about the strength of the economy. Here in Newark, it might be sunnier now, but will it last?
Cost of living is going up quite significantly and the wages really aren't.
I think it will take quite a bit of time before, hopefully, it will get easier.
I was always hard up when we was young, but now there's just me and my husband and we're a lot better off.
A lot better off was not true for the rest of the economy, as the governor made clear.
Growth at 0.1% in the first quarter of this year was much weaker, and inflation at 2.5% in March was notably lower than we had projected in February. The key question is whether this softness will prove temporary or persistent. In other words, was the weakness in the first quarter due to the weather or the climate?
The bank thinks it's mostly snow. Others are not so sure.
For us, there's things that the weather doesn't quite explain, and the statisticians said that today. They said, look, we can't really tell what the impact of the weather was, but probably for things like manufacturing it was quite minimal, so there's something else going on as well.
Later, I asked the governor, was the sharp growth downgrade a one-off?
We expect that the UK economy is going to pick back up. Not rocket back up, but pick back up, largely driven by those exporters and businesses investing, less so on household spending. And a consequence of that, we think in the end that we'll need to do some adjustments, some increases in interest rates over time, but at a pretty gentle pace.
You've been described as the unreliable boyfriend. You march us halfway up the hill saying interest rates are around the corner, and then you march us back down again. No, they're not. How do you respond to those criticisms?
There is uncertainty in the world, and it is possible, of course, that something bad could happen abroad. It is possible that the Brexit negotiations could go in a certain direction that slowed the economy for a period of time. And it's been reliable for the bank to then react to those events and adjust.
I took 2 big points from my interview with the governor. Firstly, he does believe that the bad economic news from the start of the year is likely to be reversed. And if the economy does bounce back, and that's an if, then it is likely there will be an interest rate rise before the end of the year. Kamal Ahmed.
President Trump has announced he is meeting North Korea's leader Kim Jong-un next month in Singapore on June the 12th, saying he would try to make it a very special moment for world peace. It comes after Donald Trump personally welcomed home 3 Americans who had been detained in North Korea. Nick Bryant reports from Washington.
In the middle of the night, before the birds or the president had started tweeting, the plane carrying the freed prisoners touched down on American soil. From the trauma of detention to a triumphant welcome from Donald Trump, he didn't want to miss this dramatic homecoming. It offers flesh and blood proof that his unconventional approach to diplomacy is working.
My proudest achievement will be, this is a part of it, but will be when we denuclearize that entire peninsula. This is what people have been waiting for a long time. Nobody thought we could be on this track in terms of speed. So I'm very honored to have helped the 3 folks.
This was a made-for-television moment, but the White House quickly turned it into cinema. Slow-motion footage, stirring Hollywood-style music. The former reality TV star said this must have set the all-time record for ratings at 3 o'clock in the morning. The North Korean state broadcaster doesn't have quite the same panache, but these are remarkable pictures nonetheless. Kim Jong-un meeting the new US Secretary of State Mike Pompeo in Pyongyang. The leader mocked his little rocket man, enjoying a lighter moment with the Americans ahead of his summit with Mr. Trump. Vice President Mike Pence has been talking about US expectations for that meeting.
The president senses an opening that may result in a historic agreement. What Kim Jong-un has said publicly and in discussions is that he is prepared to negotiate to achieve complete denuclearization of the Korean Peninsula.
It's now been announced that the North Korean leader's security team will soon be pounding the streets of Singapore. That's where the much-anticipated summit will be held on June the 12th.
So in a week when Donald Trump withdrew from a nuclear deal with Iran, it's full speed ahead with negotiating a new nuclear deal with North Korea. And having alienated his closest European allies, his administration is forging an improbable relationship with one of America's long-standing enemies. Nick Bryant, BBC News, Washington.
Israel says it has hit nearly all of Iran's military infrastructure in Syria in response to rocket attacks by Iranian forces. Around 20 missiles were fired from Syria at Israeli military positions in the Golan Heights, which Israel has occupied since the 1960s. The military says most of the Iranian rockets missed their targets. Others were intercepted by air defences. Our correspondent Tom Bateman is in the Golan Heights.
Israeli missiles in the skies above Damascus overnight. It was part of the biggest single strike by Israel against neighbouring Syria in a generation. The assault targeted Iranian military positions deep inside the country, including a battery Israel said launched a barrage of 20 rockets towards its territory.
The Iranian forces, the Quds units that are deployed all over Syria, are 1,600 kilometers away from Iran. The Iranians are the aggressors. They are the ones who are building offensive military infrastructure inside Syria with the clear, outspoken goal of being able to menace and terrorize Israeli civilians.
Residents of the Israeli-occupied Golan Heights had been urged to open bomb shelters.
Up in the house, yeah, you can definitely hear everything, the Air Force, the bombs, everything.
Syria's military said the Israeli strikes killed 3 people. It claimed its air defences destroyed a large part of the barrage. Israel has seen the balance of power change during the years of war in its northern neighbour. It sees a growing threat from Iran's presence in Syria. But the Iranians are staying put, determined to support the Syrian regime. Israel and Iran have been on a collision course, and last night saw a significant escalation.